priest, Father Barron, reads this gospel against the background of the logic of justice and the logic of grace. Okay? He says the logic of justice is, you help me, I'll help you. Okay? You hurt me, I'll hurt you. Usually I'll hurt you worse. Okay? But the logic of justice ends up dividing between the righteous and the unrighteous, the good guys and the bad guys, the saints and the sinners. But he contrasts that to the logic of grace, the logic of the gift. He says, even though you won't forgive me, I'll forgive you. Even though I don't owe you anything, I will give you a gift. Okay? The logic of justice is calculating. The logic of grace is not. And this is not to criticize justice. Justice is better than injustice. But the logic of grace, the logic of mercy, the logic of the gift goes beyond the logic of justice. And so with that background, you have the Pharisees in one camp and the tax collectors and prostitutes in the other. Again, the righteous and the unrighteous. And that's kind of the background of this, about the gospel. The logic of grace is kind of confounding. It's like the woman who sweeps her house in order to find a coin. The original Greek says it's a very small, very tiny denomination of money. But her action is disproportionate. Her concern is like a little ridiculous. She searches the whole house looking for this small coin, and then when she finds it, she throws a party. Okay? Like if you or I did this, we'd be institutionalized. Okay? She's nuts. She's out of her mind. But that's the logic of grace. The shepherd too. The shepherd leaves 99 sheep in the desert to go after the one that went astray. Okay? That's ridiculous. Okay? To endanger the entire flock and to go after one, and when you come back, you got that one on your shoulders. Okay? Well, again, it's kind of the extravagance of God. Okay, not miserly, but generously seeking us out. Okay, and sometimes God gets caricatured. God gets caricatured, kind of skewed, and they're both false notions. One is God is like a big marshmallow. Paul Tillich calls it the sugar daddy God. That God puts no demands on us. And the other caricature is God the tyrant. That God puts these overwhelming demands on us that we're not able to fulfill. Okay? And the reality is that God is neither a sugar daddy or a tyrant. God is both an ocean of mercy and an iron hand. Okay? Like, to those who would caricature God, the church says a plague on both your houses. Okay? Because God is neither one, but God is both. Like we say, an ocean of mercy and an iron hand. God is infinite mercy and infinite justice. The logic of justice tends to put God in a box, to say, I figured out, like, God is, this one is on God's side, this one is not. But the logic of grace really says that God is extravagant, unreasonable. God is a wild man running down the hill after his prodigal son. God kind of throws caution to the wind. Okay? And with that background, the gospel presents one of the greatest stories ever told, the prodigal son. The younger son and the older son live in the same spiritual space. They live in the logic of justice. The younger son says, give me my share of the inheritance. Give me that which is due to me. Give me justice. But the older son says, all these years I've slaved for you. Again, you owe me. Again, it's the logic of justice. Maybe the oldest son was more responsible, but it's still the logic of justice. And that oldest son can lure us into his own space. He tries to lure us. The father's response is, I know you have, to the first son is, I know you have hurt me. But he runs down the hill, throws his arms around him, kills the fatted calf. Because that's the way of mercy, that's the way of grace, that's the way of God. Okay? To the oldest son, he says, I know you are ungrateful and spiteful, but I'll leave the banquet and invite you in. Again, going beyond the logic of justice. Okay? Mother Angelica says that unless you are willing to do the ridiculous, God will not do the miraculous. God sees us a long way off, and God throws respectability to the wind. God is a madman, a wild man, running down the hill to embrace his prodigal son. Okay? And the point is that may you and I inherit the logic of grace from God our Father.